Born into a family that committed over 600 crimes, Nikko Jenkins took it to a whole new level. Claiming to hear commands from a so-called Egyptian serpent god, he went on a murderous spree, leaving Omaha in shock. From carving 666 into his forehead to suing the state for $245 million, and with his family egging him on, was it truly sacrifice for Apophis or pure madness? Early life. Nikko Allen Jenkins was born on September 16, 1986, in Omaha, Nebraska, into a family deeply involved in criminal activity. His mother, Lori Jenkins, and father, David McGee, had multiple run-ins with the law, setting an example that would shape Nikko's future. His mother was involved in fraud and drug-related offenses, while his father had an extensive history of violent crimes. Collectively, the Jenkins family had committed at least 633 crimes dating back to 1979, a staggering number that painted a grim picture of Nikko's upbringing. Nikko was surrounded by relatives who saw crime as a way of life. His sister, Erica Jenkins, would later become his closest accomplice in his darkest deeds, while his cousin, Christine Bordeaux, also played a role in his eventual murder spree. From an early age, he was exposed to violence, substance abuse, and a total disregard for the law, which normalized criminal behavior in his eyes. It didn't take long for Nikko to display violent tendencies. On October 25, 1993, when he was just 7 years old, he brought a loaded handgun to school. The incident, though without casualties, was beyond unusual in Omaha's school district and put Nikko on the police radar for the first time. Law enforcement officers, teachers, and social workers saw this as an early red flag, but attempts to intervene did little to curb his growing aggression. As Nikko moved through his childhood, reports of violent outbursts at home and school became more frequent. Teachers noted his inability to focus and his disturbing fascination with weapons. By the time he reached middle school, he had been suspended multiple times for fighting and making threats. Despite efforts from the juvenile justice system to intervene, Nikko's behavior continued to escalate. At the age of 17, Jenkins was arrested for armed robbery in 2003, marking the beginning of his serious criminal record. He and a group of friends targeted a woman at gunpoint, stealing her vehicle and personal belongings. This offense landed him a 20-year prison sentence, but authorities hoped that incarceration would rehabilitate him. Unfortunately, his time behind bars only fueled his violent nature. In 2009, during a brief release from prison to attend his grandmother's funeral, Nikko and his sister Erica seized the opportunity to attack a correctional officer who had been assigned to escort them. The incident resulted in additional charges, and both siblings were sent back to prison with extended sentences. This brazen act of defiance highlighted the deep-seated aggression within the Jenkins family. While serving time, Nikko became increasingly volatile. He spent most of his sentence in solitary confinement due to violent behavior toward fellow inmates and prison staff. Prison reports indicated that he frequently engaged in self-harm, carving symbols into his skin and exhibiting erratic behavior. During his years in solitary confinement, Jenkins began claiming that he was hearing voices from Apophis, the ancient Egyptian serpent god of darkness. He told prison staff that Apophis was instructing him to commit violent acts and sacrifices. These alarming statements were often dismissed as manipulative tactics to gain attention or special treatment, but they were clear indications of his deteriorating mental state. Throughout his troubled life, Nikko remained heavily influenced by his mother, Lori Jenkins. She played a significant role in his criminal mindset, often justifying his violent behavior and providing unwavering support even as he descended further into darkness. Lori's involvement in criminal activity, including buying firearms illegally, would later land her in prison as well. During his time behind bars, Nikko communicated regularly with Lori, who continued to reinforce his delusions and beliefs about his so-called spiritual mission. Instead of seeking help for her son, Lori encouraged his destructive tendencies, helping him obtain weapons and evade authorities when necessary. Despite countless interactions with the criminal justice system, Jenkins was repeatedly failed by those meant to rehabilitate him. Mental health evaluations conducted during his incarceration pointed to severe antisocial personality disorder and psychopathic traits. However, Jenkins often manipulated psychologists, leading to conflicting reports about his mental state. His claims of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder were dismissed as fabrications, yet prison records documented his erratic behavior, including talking to himself, self-inflicted wounds, and threats against staff. The Nebraska Department of Corrections faced criticism for its inability to properly diagnose and treat him before releasing him into society. On July 30, 2013, after serving 10 years of a 20-year sentence for a 2002 carjacking, Nikko Jenkins walked out of prison a free man with no probation or parole supervision. Family members celebrated his return with a party where, shockingly, they gifted him a shotgun, a weapon that would later be used in his killing spree. Within weeks of his release, Nikko's paranoia and violent tendencies worsened. He spoke frequently about purging society and claimed that his release was a sign from Apophis that it was time to carry out his dark mission. With his mother, Lori Jenkins, his sister, Erica Jenkins, and his cousin, Christine Bordeaux, supporting him, there was little hope of him integrating back into normal life. The streets of Omaha were about to witness a series of senseless bloodshed. The crimes. Jenkins wasted no time getting back to his violent ways. On the night of August 11, 2013, he lured two unsuspecting victims, Juan Uribe Pena and Jorge Cajiga Ruiz, to Omaha's Spring Lake Park under the pretense of a sexual encounter. Jenkins, assisted by his sister Erica and cousin Christine, promised the men they would meet women, but instead, it was a trap. Once inside a white Ford pickup truck, Jenkins pulled out the shotgun and executed both men with a single shot to the head. Their bodies were later found by a parole officer patrolling the area at 5:01 a.m. The brutal execution-style killings sent shockwaves through the community, leaving police with few leads and no immediate suspects. Investigators at the scene noted the victims' wallets and phones were missing, leading them to believe the murders were robbery-related. However, Jenkins had something far darker in mind. He claimed the killings were sacrifices for Apophis, the ancient Egyptian serpent god he believed spoke to him. 8 days later, Jenkins struck again. This time his victim wasn't a stranger. It was Curtis Bradford, a former prison acquaintance. The two had met while incarcerated, and just 24 hours before Bradford's murder, Jenkins posted a now infamous Facebook photo with him. On the night of August 18th, Jenkins, Erica, and Curtis were seen driving through the city. Jenkins told Bradford they were planning a series of robberies and convinced him to join. But once they reached their destination, a garage near 18th and Clark Street, Jenkins handed Curtis an unloaded gun and staged a setup. Erica, without hesitation, shot Curtis twice in the back of the head, with Nikko following up to ensure the kill. His reasoning? He wanted the honor of taking the life himself. Bradford's body was discovered the next morning, and by then, Jenkins was already planning his next attack. Unlike the previous victims, Andrea Kruger, a 33-year-old mother of three, had no connection to Jenkins. On her way home from work in the early hours of August 21st, Andrea was stopped at an intersection near 168th and 4th Streets when she was brutally ambushed. Jenkins dragged her from her SUV and shot her 4 times, once in the head, neck, and twice in the back. Her body was left in the street, and Jenkins sped off in her vehicle. This random act of violence shook Omaha to its core. Police worked around the clock, now aware that a serial killer was on the loose. Andrea's murder was unlike the others. It had no ritualistic ties or deceptive lures. It was an act of sheer brutality, possibly committed in an attempt to steal her vehicle and escape town. But Jenkins wasn't a criminal mastermind. His reckless actions were piling up, and law enforcement was closing in. Despite his apparent confidence in evading law enforcement, Jenkins left a trail of evidence that ultimately led to his arrest. First, detectives obtained surveillance footage showing Lori Jenkins purchasing the very shotgun used in the murders. That crucial piece of evidence connected the weapon to the Jenkins family, and it didn't take long for investigators to build their case. But it was Jenkins' reckless behavior at his own release party that sealed his fate. During the celebration, he had an argument with his girlfriend and made violent threats against her. Fearing for her life, she reported him to the police. This complaint provided authorities with the perfect opportunity to bring him in for questioning. Once Jenkins was in custody, police began linking him to the murders through forensic evidence, ballistics, and witness testimonies. His involvement became even more apparent during his 8-hour-long interrogation, where his conflicting stories began to unravel. During the intense interrogation session on September 3, 2013, Jenkins initially attempted to justify his actions by citing ritualistic sacrifices to Apophis. He described elaborate ceremonies and claimed that the murders were offerings to gain favor with the serpent god. As investigators pressed him, Jenkins' story began to shift. He blamed his family, claiming that Erica and Christine orchestrated the killings while he only provided intelligence. Later, he pointed fingers at the Nebraska correctional system, arguing that years in solitary confinement had driven him to madness. However, Jenkins' lack of remorse and erratic behavior during questioning only reinforced the notion that he was a calculated killer. He laughed at investigators, spoke in riddles, and even bragged about his actions in disturbing detail. Within just 3 weeks of his release, Nikko Jenkins claimed 4 lives in a spree that highlighted serious flaws in the criminal justice system. The trial. On February 19, 2014, while awaiting trial for the brutal murders of 4 people, Nikko Jenkins made an unexpected move. He filed a federal lawsuit against the state of Nebraska. In his complaint, Jenkins demanded a staggering $245 million, claiming that his wrongful release from prison and lack of proper mental health care were to blame for his crimes. According to Jenkins, years of solitary confinement had worsened his alleged schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, conditions he insisted were ignored by prison officials. However, psychiatric evaluations conducted during the trial painted a different picture. Court-appointed psychologists found no evidence of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Instead, they diagnosed Jenkins with antisocial personality disorder, a condition characterized by persistent disregard for others and a lack of remorse. The findings were a critical blow to Jenkins' defense, weakening his claims that his crimes were the result of the mental illness rather than calculated violence. Despite mounting evidence against him, Jenkins remained committed to his narrative, blaming the correctional system for his actions. His lawsuit, though ultimately dismissed, reflected his unwavering belief that he was the victim in the case, rather than the perpetrator of a heinous crime spree. In a move that left many stunned, Nikko Jenkins chose to represent himself during his trial, despite his history of erratic and violent behavior. Legal experts expressed concerns about his competency, but Jenkins insisted that he was fully capable of handling his defense. His decision turned the courtroom into a bizarre and unsettling spectacle. Throughout the proceedings, Jenkins engaged in strange and unsettling behavior. He frequently spoke in tongues, muttered incomprehensible statements, and even laughed during graphic testimonies detailing the deaths of his victims. In some instances, he made direct threats to the prosecution and exhibited a complete lack of remorse for his actions. The jury and courtroom spectators were visibly disturbed by his antics. While some believed Jenkins was attempting to manipulate the proceedings by appearing mentally unfit, others saw his behavior as evidence of genuine psychological distress. Regardless of intent, his actions only solidified his reputation as a dangerous and unstable individual. The prosecution meticulously built a compelling case against Jenkins, presenting an overwhelming amount of forensic evidence and witness testimonies. Ballistics experts confirmed that the shotgun used in all 4 murders was the same weapon Jenkins had received from his family upon his release from prison. Surveillance footage also played a key role in the case. Investigators uncovered video evidence of Jenkins' mother, Lori Jenkins, purchasing the shotgun at a local store, linking the weapon directly to the Jenkins family. Additionally, cell phone records placed Jenkins at the crime scenes during the times of the murders, further strengthening the prosecution's argument. Witnesses, including Jenkins' ex-girlfriend, provided damning testimony. She recounted his threats and violent tendencies, detailing how Jenkins had boasted about his crimes and expressed a desire to commit more murders. Despite Jenkins' attempts to portray himself as mentally incompetent, the prosecution argued that he was fully aware of his actions and meticulously planned each murder. The evidence suggested a pattern of calculated brutality rather than random acts of violence driven by mental illness. After weeks of dramatic testimony and erratic courtroom behavior, the verdict finally came on April 16, 2014. Nikko Jenkins was found guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. The jury deliberated for a short period before reaching their decision, as the evidence against Jenkins was overwhelming. The conviction sent a wave of relief through Omaha, bringing some closure to the families of the victims. However, in the months following his conviction, Jenkins' sentencing was delayed multiple times due to concerns about his mental health. While awaiting his fate, he engaged in increasingly bizarre and violent acts of self-mutilation. In one of the most shocking incidents, Jenkins carved the number 666 into his forehead, an act that further fueled speculation about his mental state. He later attempted to carve his forehead into the shape of a serpent, claiming it was a tribute to Apophis, the Egyptian serpent god he believed was guiding him. Prison officials reported that Jenkins required 27 stitches after one particularly gruesome self-harm attempt. Despite these incidents, psychiatric evaluations continued to determine that Jenkins was fit to stand trial and face sentencing. The court remained firm in its stance that his actions were deliberate and manipulative rather than the result of genuine mental illness. On May 30, 2017, after years of legal proceedings and delays, Jenkins was officially sentenced to death. The judge handed down the ruling, citing the extreme brutality of the murders and Jenkins' complete lack of remorse. In addition to the death sentence, he was also given a 450-year prison sentence for related charges, including the use of a deadly weapon and felon in possession of a firearm. Jenkins was not the only one facing justice. His mother, Lori Jenkins, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for purchasing the firearm used in the killings. She maintained that she had no knowledge of her son's intentions, but the court found her culpable in enabling his crimes. His sister, Erica Jenkins, who played a more direct role in the murders, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The court deemed her an active participant in the planning and execution of the killings, particularly the murder of Curtis Bradford. Jenkins' cousin, Christine Bordeaux, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her role in luring victims and assisting with logistics. While not directly involved in the killings, her cooperation with Jenkins placed her behind bars for a significant portion of her life. The final days. Since being sentenced to death on May 30, 2017, Nikko Jenkins has remained on death row at the Nebraska State Penitentiary awaiting execution. But for Jenkins, the wait has been anything but quiet. His case has been marked by legal battles, disturbing behavior, and ongoing mental health evaluations that continue to delay his ultimate fate. Following his sentencing, Jenkins intensified his claims of severe mental illness, arguing that his crimes were the result of untreated psychological conditions. He insisted that his time in solitary confinement exacerbated his schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, although multiple psychiatric evaluations found no credible evidence of these conditions. Instead, experts diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, a condition characterized by a lack of empathy and manipulative tendencies. Jenkins' legal team has repeatedly filed motions arguing that his mental health should exempt him from execution. In May 2024, his defense requested a comprehensive mental health study to challenge his death sentence, claiming that his psychological deterioration made him unfit for execution. However, the Nebraska courts have largely rejected these arguments, maintaining that Jenkins remains competent to face his punishment. In September 2024, he filed a motion for a new trial, arguing that crucial evidence had been mishandled and that he had received ineffective legal representation. The state of Nebraska opposed the motion, arguing that Jenkins was fully aware of his actions and had received a fair trial. Despite these rulings, Jenkins has continued his bizarre behavior behind bars. Reports from prison officials describe him as unpredictable, with frequent outbursts and self-inflicted injuries. His legal maneuvers have also extended to lawsuits against the state. In previous filings, Jenkins demanded millions in damages, claiming that Nebraska's correctional system had failed him by releasing him without adequate mental health treatment. These lawsuits were ultimately dismissed, but they highlighted Jenkins' ongoing attempts to shift blame onto the system that once housed him. His appeals process has delayed his execution date multiple times. Under Nebraska law, executions require extensive reviews and appeals before they can be carried out, and Jenkins has used every available legal avenue to prolong his time on death row. Life on death row for Nikko Jenkins has been anything but ordinary. Prison officials have reported several alarming incidents involving Jenkins. In one instance, he used a makeshift weapon to slash his arms, requiring emergency medical attention. In another, he was caught attempting to mutilate his body in what he claimed was a ritual to appease Apophis. Due to his erratic behavior and history of violence, Jenkins is under constant observation. Correctional officers have noted that he often speaks in a strange, indecipherable language and has made repeated threats against prison staff and fellow inmates. His disturbing actions have made him one of the most challenging inmates in Nebraska's prison system. Security measures around Jenkins have been heightened over the years, with corrections officers taking extra precautions during his transport and interactions within the prison. His reputation for unpredictability has made him a high-risk prisoner, and authorities are constantly on alert for potential disruptions. As at the time of this video, no execution date has been set for Jenkins. However, legal experts believe it's only a matter of time before the courts reject his final appeals and move forward with his execution. The question remains, when will it happen? Today could be the day, tomorrow could be the day, or the day after. Until then, Jenkins sits in his cell, awaiting the moment when the state of Nebraska will finally decide his fate.